Okay. What's up, good people? It's your girl KB. You know what I do, and you know why I do it. It is Monday morning, and I'm feeling every bit of Monday morning. It is October 20th, and it's 3:18 in the a.m. I have a ton of paperwork as per usual, and I'm going to get into it in a minute. But I just want to share with you some of the things that I've done and seen and feel compelled to speak on. Okay? So bear with me. Very first thing I'm going to speak on is my choice of movie watching. As I shared, whenever I'm in my creative mode, I like background noise. So I put on old movies or stuff, I've already seen, so I know the plot, but I can hear the dialogue while I'm creating. And so that being said, in the early stages where it required a whole lot of attention, I uh, was listening and kind of half watching the Netflix series Boots, which is, I want to say, a very interesting little mini series. There was a time where I was going to cancel my Netflix, but they've gotten into some prime time events, if you will, and some really interesting movie making. So I kept Netflix. And you know what got the boot? Disney and Hulu. And I don't even have to go into the reasons why. Most of you know. So, Boots, like I said, is a very interesting series. So I encourage you to watch it. It's like a coming of age story. And I'm going to say more so in coming into the knowledge of self and self acceptance, self awareness, you know, uh, defining boundaries. It's a good watch, but it's also filled with things that make you go, hmm. Then I got into a little weightier subject. I watched the autobiography of Miss Jane Pittman again, you know, just to refresh some historic events. Now, that movie was written by Ernest Gaines, and for me, it spoke to the strength of Black women. It defined Black women as the backbone, I want to say, of Black society. And it talked about customs and norms that many of us have forgotten or got away from, um, trying to embrace segregation. There's some things that work for us, folks, bottom line. There's some things that were brought about from the motherland that kept us. And now we see them as old-fashioned, old-timey, nonsensical. But a lot of us are running back to our roots, if you will. And speaking of roots, you know they're just charging per episode on streaming services. Luckily, I have the entire series on DVD. But yeah, that bothers me. That nobody will see our history played out because they're charging per episode as a way to muffle that history, to silence that history. And I want every young Black person to realize or to wake up to the fact that we are systemically being silenced. And the very fiber of this country is built on systems that capitalize on our efforts but deny us participation in anything other than the supply of the effort. So in other words, we'll never reap the benefits in a system that's set up to use us as mules. You know, we just get to die on the farm, probably in some form of labor. As I watched Miss Jane Pittman, I watched that kind of injustice being played out. I know it was a Hollywood production because they showed things like good master and bad master, which was, blatant. This one particular scene, there's a owner of the plantation saying, after the Civil War, he never really asked of anything from the people on his land other than to, share whatever it is that they cropped or whatever they saw fit. And one of the lines was he basically got a handful of berries, that wasn't fit for human consumption, or sloppy seconds, if you will. That was kind of a graphic phrase, but, and he said he really didn't care because he had what he needed. And as he was saying that soliloquy, as the actor was saying that, I thought, well, what did you share other than to keep these folks alive so that you could have? What did you share after the so-called raids of the Northern soldiers? Now, I'm not saying the Northern soldiers didn't raid and pillage, because they did. But what did you share to these folks? Again, other than things to keep them alive to work for you. Because now you didn't have for a brief moment of time. But you knew you had the privilege to get all that back. Now, you were uncomfortable, but the people were struggling to survive. There's a difference. And see, that's what people don't understand, refuse to accept. When a white person hits rock bottom, they always have the opportunity or the privilege to bounce back or for redemption. Whereas a black person who's under the same set of circumstances is vilified, demonized, and most likely will never have the opportunity to come back based on the institutions that we have in place. So I'm going to piggyback this movie with a real life story that I heard the other day, where there's two black men. Now I have to go to where it was. I want to say Wisconsin, but I'm not quite sure, so I'll have to go back and look it up. But there's two black men that are incarcerated. Now, the so-called eyewitnesses recanted their stories. The people who actually did the crimes confessed did their time, and have been released. The two innocent brothers who are still incarcerated, you heard me, even after the witnesses recanted and all this other stuff, they're still incarcerated. Why? They're innocent. And it's been a goodly number of years for these two brothers. They're innocent. The people who acknowledge the crimes have done their time and been released. But you're still holding these two brothers. Why? What is the premise for holding these two? That's what I'm talking about. And that's what people refuse to accept and acknowledge, that the systems that we all participate in, every last one of us, are set up to esteem some and debase others. And we won't call it out. We'll give it a name and make it socially acceptable.